Right, well, good evening, everybody. And yeah, this is a session about men's health. And I'm just going to get right to it and say it the way it is, so that hopefully it's quite a lot of information to share, but I think it's important to share it. And certainly some of our distributors, if you are a guest on this tonight and you have a distributor with you, they can certainly explain some of the things in terms of the product information. So I'm just going to go ahead and chat about men's health. So the positive outcomes that I'd like to see come from this particular presentation is that we reduce inflammation and improve circulation. You know, inflammation is actually creating negative impacts on our body in all sorts of different ways, and affects men's health specifically as well. And of course, improving our circulation improves men's health in all sorts of ways. And so this is what I actually want to try and achieve by the end of the presentation. So as Drew mentioned, we've got a very eminent group of scientists who make up our scientific advisory board. We were the first in this industry to have such a group of people, and Dr. Arthur First, I'll make reference to him later, but was someone who joined us as a cancer researcher actually, and brought all his knowledge, but he loved the fact that we were actually into prevention and trying to understand how we could equip the body to help itself. But his one proviso was that if he was going to join a company such as NeoLife, it had to be based in science. So he basically turned our product destiny over to science, and we'll be very grateful for that. And we've maintained that reputation and philosophy since then, from way back in the 1960s, 1970s. So at NeoLife, we are all about cells. So just to give you some sort of background, we're all made of cells, men, women. And so the quality of the cell is definitely something that we make reference to frequently. So I will constantly reference possibly the quality of the cell membrane, that orange circle, or managing to get nutrients to dock onto that cell and influence the cell in the way that they should. So this is kind of a graphic that just explains that we can have healthy cells and unhealthy ones. And if we have unhealthy cells, you can see there that the cell membrane is not as effective as it could be. So that's the protector of the cell, and obviously nutrients that are present may not be able to get in, even in spite of the fact that we're swallowing them. And of course, everything just looks tired and a little bit less than perfect. And that's eventually, if enough of our cells look like that, that's exactly how we will feel. So whether men or women, that's exactly how the body works. But we're going to talk more specifically about men's health. And as I say, we're going to be pretty straightforward about it. Hormones, the testosterone, that is in fact something that kicks into play at puberty, and is responsible obviously for the male characteristics that turn boys into men. It carries on right through our life. In fact, it depletes slowly as we get older, but unlike women, testosterone doesn't suddenly or dramatically plummet at sort of middle age, or when we would call it menopause in women. It doesn't change so dramatically, but it does taper off, some men more than others. And then we can look at the anatomy of the male in terms of the prostate. It's a gland that's part of the male anatomy, and its primary function really is to produce the fluid that nourishes and transports the sperm. So that makes it distinctly a male component. Then fertility, obviously our reproductive capabilities, the quality of the sperm we produce. And then of course the all-important virility, our potency, our impotence, and of course the terminology is erectile dysfunction, or I'll just refer to it as ED, because that's the term that we use. So that's what we are going to chat about this evening. So just talking about testosterone and normalizing its levels, I'm going to move between products and information as I go along. So to maintain normal testosterone levels, right through the male life cycle, zinc is a very important mineral. And you can see it's also important for fertility and reproduction. So it's something that in fact we should make sure that our youngsters actually have enough of, because it actually it determines, as I say, the male characteristic. It influences sexual maturity. So at puberty, it's important that we have adequate amounts of zinc. Of course, we also have zinc in many of our different products. So let's just be aware that we don't add more and more zinc to our intake if we're taking a variety of different supplements. But I want to just highlight the fact that a lack of zinc actually has an influence on the process of puberty, adolescence, and move towards manhood. So let's look at the product more specifically. We have a product that we call chelated, and that is something I'll explain to you now. There's a good reason for it. Pretty much minerals in general are not very well absorbed. They're actually quite easily distracted. That's not actually a scientific term, but just because of their chemistry, they can possibly get into the system or into the digestive system but actually not be absorbed. So what we did, and in fact, Dr. Arthur first created this, the gentleman I was talking to who started our scientific advisory board, it was part of his research, was to actually chelate or protect the mineral. So you'll see there that we've got two little substances which are amino acids. Those are proteins. Now you and I, and we're all made of protein, so the body would fully recognize it. It wouldn't be amazed by this addition to the mineral. And in fact, what it does is it protects the mineral and makes it, if you like, less distractible. So in fact, it's more easily absorbed. So that's what double amino acid chelation means. We've attached something to the zinc molecule. And as I say, Dr. Arthur first, who brought it to NeoLife, in fact, as part of his cancer research, he was pioneering technology with minerals, and he realized that they were not well absorbed. And so he actually pioneered this technology and brought it to NeoLife. Of course, now it's become part of the nutritional industry or supplementation industry. But what he proved, in fact, was that by chelating a mineral, you can actually enhance its absorption almost sixfold. So zinc is a very important mineral, and we want it to be absorbed effectively. But as I said, if we're taking a combination of different ingredients, remember, for those of you who are taking a variety of our products, obviously zinc is present in many of our multivitamins and the multi-mineral, in the shake, even in full motion if you're taking it. So, you know, more is not always better. Make sure that you're having an adequate amount. We don't want to sort of go in excess of about 40 milligrams. So that's quite easy to achieve if you're taking a variety. But if you're just looking in to take zinc as an additional agent, then this is the product of choice. And you can happily take the label dose, which is just 2 a day. And then in terms of the prostate, at puberty, it obviously kicks in, starts to grow as we mature, probably up until about 40. It varies from gentleman to gentleman, obviously, but it stays the same sort of prostate gland that you developed as a young man. But it starts to, what tends to typically happen, I think possibly as people are also living longer, but we get what we call BPH, or benign prostatic hyperplasia. It's a bit of a mouthful, but in actual fact, it's basically an enlargement of the prostate. It doesn't happen in every situation, but it is quite common. And as I say, as people are living longer, it's more likely to happen. The important thing of it is that it's benign. That means it's not cancerous. And hyperplasia simply means an increase in the number of cells. But there's nothing sinister about it particularly. It does come with its issues. And as I say, very common, but not necessarily in terms of a disease. It's not disease causing, and it's not cancerous. So we look at the three concerns that we have in terms of the prostate. Obviously, infection or inflammation it's relatively common. Infection is what we call prostatitis. They can be obviously be caused for various reasons. I mean, it could be a bacterial infection. It could be due to the urinary system that can affect and influence the prostate. Obviously, this enlargement that I made mention of, that's a common concern and an issue in men's lives. Doesn't have to be, and sometimes, you know, if you have a concern about that, you obviously have to speak to your doctor. There are different ways of treating it. Very often it's just it's wait and watch, and very often it just settles down. And then, of course, cancer is a concern. I mean, cancer is a concern for everyone around the world, but prostate cancer is very high on the list, and depending pretty much on the population group that you're part of, it could be the #1 cancer in your group. But between cancer of the lungs, the skin, and prostate, they are the biggest concerns for men sort of worldwide. So it is a concern, and it's something that we want people to be educated about. And there are actually very easy ways and effective ways of actually preventing these things and protecting ourselves. And that's what we want to achieve at NeoLife. We want to encourage people to recognize the value of the different foods they eat, the gaps in their diet, and what it is one can do, and what NeoLife has done extremely effectively in trying to fill those dietary gaps. So one of the products I want to just make reference to, which really should be part of every man's supplement toolbox, if you like, is Cruciferous Plus. Now, if you've never heard of cruciferous, that's a group of vegetables that have a very sort of pungent sulfur-based taste and smell. So you can see they're broccoli, radish, kale, mustards, and things like also your Brussels sprouts, your cauliflower, things that, you know, not typically on everybody's plate. And funny enough, should be there as one portion a day as the recommendations, the dietary recommendations. So this is a very important addition, as I say, because there is a dietary gap. And what's interesting though, and obviously we as a company and as a nutritional supplement don't make specific claims about disease benefits, but I've highlighted there that broccoli, and I've put watercress, which there's also a supplement or a plant called garden cress, so it's kind of very similar. And these are the two active ingredients that I've put there in green alongside them that have been well or very highly researched in terms of the benefits of these cruciferous vegetables. And in fact, specifically to combat cancer. So we're not saying that about our products, but that is in fact what those foods will do. And in fact, even in a nutrition textbook that you would get at a university doing a course, like a dietitian's course, what it actually says under broccoli is that this helps to prevent cancer. It talks that also about the watercress and also Brussels sprouts and various other foods for these indole 3-carbanols. So we don't have to remember the names specifically, but now that you see them, you'll know they're actually written in our literature. And we have specifically gone and extracted these active ingredients from the broccoli and from the watercress and from the various other cruciferous agents that we've put into the blend. What they actually do, and as I said, this is quite well researched. It's something that we are just trading on, and that's why we did it. Is because in fact they enhance our detoxification systems, as I pointed out, and positively influence the health of the prostate. But they do this by actually being what they call cancer blocking agents. And the way they do that is inside the cell, and we talk a lot in NeoLife about fruit and vegetables, and we talk a lot about protecting those cells that I showed you initially. But what these do is these particular components, the cruciferous family, don't just protect the cell, they actually help the cell protect itself. And they do that by upregulating or stimulating enzymes that everyone produces and helps them to increase their detoxification ability. In other words, they fight back. They actually can neutralize substances that are toxic, that could even be cancerous, and they make them more soluble and turn them into something that the cell can manage or perhaps excrete and get out the body. So they have that ability to do that for the cell. So these are enzymes that we all have, and they're called phase 2 enzymes, but these vegetables actually upregulate them. And they decrease the ability to cause cellular damage as a result. So that's a blocking agent, and it can be against a carcinogen, in other words, something that's potentially able to cause cancer to that cell. But even over and above that ability of being a blocking agent and having that activity, it's even been found that even if a cell, let's say in the prostate, for example, has already converted or been transformed into something that's showing cancerous signs, they're actually able to suppress that growth of a cell that has already been transformed. So this is not a magic cure or treatment for cancer, but I want to just show you the value and the power of different foods, and in this case, this particular family of vegetables actually, that should be on our plate on a daily basis. Just one portion, but it's not something that I think most of us achieve on a daily basis. So Cruciferous Plus, definitely a plus in terms of, as I said, looking after your health from a supplement point of view. As I said, we're big into fruit and vegetables, and some of these names we've actually pioneered in the marketplace. Flavonoid is a collective term for your berries, and you can see there the deep black and red grapes and the cherries, all the different flavored berries and colors. Flavonoids is a collective term for those sort of colorful fruit and vegetables. And the actual flavonoid name is for the pigment, the color. That's why we have to eat a colorful plate of fruit and vegetables, because it's all the colors in those fruit and vegetables that are very protective as well. In fact, the berries have been shown to, the berry family have been shown to actually reduce cancer risk. That's also something documented quite widely. And interestingly, specifically the cranberries that we have in this particular product seem to be very beneficial for urinary tract infections, which do tend to happen. And what cranberries tend to do is they prevent bacteria from attaching themselves to the cell walls and in the urinary tract, for example, and preventing those bacteria from sort of taking hold. So they're very effective in protecting and defending our cells, but also in combating certain typical, as I said, you sort of talked about inflammation or infections that happen in the bowel system. So this family of fruit and vegetables also should be part of the supplement toolbox, as it were. And then just to finish off, the carotenoid family, which is, again, the carotenoid is the collective term for the colors, predominantly in your red, yellow, and orange family of fruit and vegetables. So those that I've listed there are in fact in this product. And again, they will protect the cell, the membrane of the cell. And again, you'll find these very well documented, as I say, in nutritional textbooks and for university students, that they will help to reduce the risk of certain cancers, certainly protect against them. And in fact, reference was specifically made to tomatoes that I could find. The name of the carotenoid of the tomatoes is called lycopene. And it's specifically stated that this helps to reduce the risk of prostate cancer. And of course, it definitely enhances the immune system. It's something we've already tested this product for. So fruit and vegetables definitely should be on everybody's radar. And if we're not managing to achieve the amounts that we should on a regular basis, NeoLife have definitely stepped in to fill that gap and enabling people to make that shift. If it's not on your plate on a regular basis, it's going to take a while to get you used to doing that. Carotenoids, flavonoids, and cruciferous components are going to assist in bridging that gap. So to help do that in a very easy way, what we've actually done is we've put all three of these different families together in one little pack. So we've got a group of 30 little sachets, mini little sachets that you can literally pop in your pocket or in your briefcase or your gym bag or whatever. And you've got a representation of each of those families in the proportions that we should be eating on a regular basis. So it's 3 carotenoids, 2 flavonoids, and 1 cruciferous portion. So that's equivalent to 6 optimal portions of those particular protective agents in this particular product. So if you would rather prefer to have a little pack and it's easy and it's all done and dusted in one swallow, this is the product for you. Otherwise, you can prioritize by taking them individually. Right, and so a product that we don't often talk about, or it's been in our market for a long, long time, and I'm not sure that everybody references it as something that the male system would actually benefit from, and that's wheat germ oil. And there's a very good reason for it. Many of our distributors will understand, but possibly some of you looking in might wonder why we're talking about this, because in fact, wheat is something that we have in a huge amount around the food that we eat. We find it in all sorts of things that we eat. But the food industry has decided what part of the wheat is going to go into those different foods. So when we look at what the little wheat kernel should look, or does look like, in fact, it's got 3 different components, and I've just done a very simple little graphic on the side. Pretty much what happens in the food industry when they're providing foods for us, biscuits or cakes or bread or even pasta, is we actually take away the outer bran, we polish it, we refine it, in other words, so we lose the fiber and we lose some of the vitamins and minerals that are naturally occurring. It typically remove the germ, which is actually the oil, and it's sort of the living part of that little seed, because the oil would actually prevent that wheat they're going to use in the food industry from having a shelf life. It could go rancid very quickly, and we wouldn't be able to keep it in our cupboards for the length of times that we do, and it just simply wouldn't have the shelf life we are all used to. So what happens is we end up just with that starchy endosperm, as they call it, just the starchy portion of our wheat. So that's the reality of the food industry and the food that that you and I have a choice. We don't really have a choice in some of these things. This is the food that's available on the shelves in the supermarkets. And very often, if we haven't thought it through, we simply pick it up and take it home and haven't realized what it is we're losing out on. So what is it we're losing out on? Well, the actual oil, which is what we're talking about here, excuse me, and which NeoLife has actually extracted, is rich in what we call essential fatty acids. Essential meaning that our bodies cannot make it. And so if we don't get those oils from our food, we simply don't get it. And that starts to influence those cells and the cell membranes that I showed you right in the beginning of the presentation. So already here's a nutrient and a set of oils that the body needs to keep our cell membranes, working for us so that they can be receptive to all these nutrients that we've been talking about. But in fact, we don't commonly get them in the foods we're eating. So there's a huge gap that has, quite a lot of consequence. That oil is also a natural source of vitamin E, which again we have to get from our food, and it has a very powerful protective property in it to protect our cells and other aspects of certainly the male's body. And then we've got something called phytosterols. Now, you saw when I showed you that fruit and vegetable little pack, it was called Phyto Defense. And phyto means plant. So this is called phytosterols. That's another thing that we find in the cell walls, actually, of these different plants, and in the wheat in particular. And so this wheat germ oil is providing all these nutrients, natural fats that we can't make, vitamin E, and then these sterols that come from plants. And just one point I'm referencing here is if you look at the word phytosterol and then you look at cholesterol, the end of the words are exactly the same. But you don't get cholesterol in plants, you get it only in animal-sourced foods. So what happens when we eat something that's got phytosterols in it is that they have very similar structures. And what is interesting, and perhaps we should understand this now, but we'll see it later as we go along. I talked about nutrients going through the cell membrane and into the cell, but it's almost like a lock and key situation. So there's a specific key that fits into a specific lock. In other words, a little spot that's made for that key on each cell membrane. And so the structure of that key, as you know, your key is specific to your car and nobody else's key will go into that lock or in your door. And that's exactly what happens on the cell membranes and with the different nutrients. They have an affinity and they gravitate towards the lock to which that key actually fits. So the reason I'm telling you this is because these two components, although the one comes from a plant and the one comes from animals, and that we eat them both or should possibly do that, have a very similar structure. They have a very similar key because they come from a similar family. And so if we have adequate amounts of phytosterols, and we're also eating something with cholesterol in it, it's very likely that the plant key is going to get to the cell first, take up that little key and lock process, and not enable the cholesterol to get there because of the parking spot, if you like, or the lock is now taken care of, and cholesterol doesn't fit there anymore. And so if we're swallowing them both at the same time, the cholesterol could well just be pushed straight out the body. This is through the digestive system and never be absorbed by the body. So that's why it has I put there a protection against cholesterol. So you can see how important wheat germ oil actually is. And yet it's commonly removed from our food supply. Right, so what's it got to do in terms of what we're talking about in terms of male health? Well, it has very powerful influences on the reproductive benefits and system of the body. Because vitamin E increases blood flow, and you remember I said one of our outcomes is that we want to improve circulation. And basically, if I can, in a nutshell, say men's health is very much dependent collectively on our circulation. It's blood supply that we want to be effective as a man in every respect. So if we can increase blood flow and increase the oxygen to different parts of the body, that's actually a major outcome that men would want to achieve. It decreases oxidative stress, which simply means damage to cells. It provides the essential fatty acids that I mentioned. And those membranes I was talking about, all membranes, well, little sperms have membranes which are very sensitive to influences and damage in the body in general. So oxidation, as we call it. And vitamin E is going to have a very positive effect of protecting human sperm. So it's really one of the best antioxidants for the male reproductive system. So wheat germ oil, again, should be something to consider. We have got some in our treonine, and that's another product that we have that a distributor can explain to you. But we've got a more concentrated amount of wheat germ oil specifically in this particular product. Yeah, and just talking about the circulation, including things of heart health benefit, because we want to increase the blood flow and oxygen availability. We want to reduce damage to cells. We want to improve cell membrane fluidity. And as I say, regulate cholesterol. That's something that's going to affect the quality of our blood vessels, and that's going to affect and impair the quality of our blood circulation. So wheat germ oil, a product to remember. And then one that we haven't probably typically talked about, we know this product and it's familiar to many people and very effective, but just in terms of men's health, amytone. Now, as the name suggests and the picture suggests, AMI is to do with amino acids, and so it is a source of amino acids, and amino acids are proteins, and so they enable the body to synthesize or make more protein. So hormones are made of proteins, our skin is made of protein, our hair, our nails, our enzymes. So we're just about entirely protein. So what we have done here is taken out a select group of proteins to be able to use to be able to tone the body, to keep it in a youthful process and to lay down muscle tissue and to act in a more youthful way for longer. So what has been found, in fact, is some of these amino acids, for example, L-arginine, which is in the product, is actually a very effective, what they call a vasodilator. In other words, it opens blood vessels, which is very important for blood circulation. And as I say, men's health, all the things we're going to talk about, is very dependent on good quality blood supply. That's what you really want to have everything working for you in your favor. Perfect, good quality circulation. So if we can have agents that are going to clear the blood vessels, keep them in good condition, improve the flow, open the blood vessel, that's exactly what you want. So very important for circulation, actually plays a part in fertility, improves the amount of sperm that is available and the motility, in other words, the ability to get around, and of course, general reproduction and your overall health of the reproductive system. So quite an interesting inclusion that one could take on a regular basis. What I want to point out again, as I just said with the zinc, just because it sounds good and it sounds like what you need, we don't have to take, half the bottle in one day and the next half and take 3 in the month. This is a month's supply. Take it on a regular basis. You will get the results. These are food-based ingredients, and we do that on a regular daily basis. So we don't have to take high concentrations. It's more about being consistent. But don't forget amytone as a very beneficial addition to what you would need for men's health. And then, of course, if you're wanting to just try and put all this together and just, have a more relaxed, balanced kind of lifestyle as well, which also obviously improves our health. We've got a herbal range of products, and in this particular case called Masculine Herbal Complex, which is more specific to our talk tonight. Now, for those South Africans on the call, which of course there are many, but there are others from other parts of Africa as well. But you might be saying, well, why talk about Masculine Herbal Complex, because we can't get it in South Africa. So let me just give you a reason why it isn't in South Africa, just to give you some perspective. I can recall, in fact, I was involved when we actually introduced this range, and I was very privileged to actually meet the medical herbalist who put these products together for us, Dr. Ann Walker. And of course, when we introduced them into South Africa, everything was the way it should be in terms of the regulators. But since then, the regulators, our authorities here in South Africa, have decided that one of these ingredients they would prefer not to have in the product is one to do with the nervous system. And yet we sell this. So there's nothing dangerous about it. It's just that they don't see it as a combination product. They see it as something that should stand alone. And yet we sell this product all over the world. We're in more than 50 countries around the world, and but it is not allowed to come into South Africa with that particular ingredient in it. So you might say, well, why don't you just change the formulation? Well, the point is it's not as easy as that, because as I say, we sell it all over the world very successfully, and it's such a successful product. What we have done is introduce it into Namibia. So we fly it directly in from the States into Namibia, because their regulators have absolutely no issue with it. But we can't bring it through any of the South African ports of entry. So that is why it's not available in South Africa or in Lesotho, Eswatini, or Botswana at the moment. But that doesn't mean you can't access it. If it's something you want, you are able to get it from other markets. And as I say, there are many people using it very effectively. So what is the distinction here with herbal products compared to our nutrition range? Well, I guess the question could be, can I be healthy but not well? And the answer is yes. In other words, you might not be feeling 100%. You go to the doctor, perhaps everything's okay. Can't really find anything wrong with you, but you're actually not feeling 100%. So the interesting thing about herbs is that they're not our first port of call. In other words, nutrients and things from foods like vitamins, minerals, proteins, fibers, your phytonutrients. Those are the things that nourish the body and enable it to grow. But your herbs, which still come from plants and are completely natural plant sources, are things that actually tweak our well-being. And that's what makes them so powerful. So they're a very, very effective addition to your normal good quality nutrient intake. And what is also unique in our particular products is that we don't just use one ingredient or maybe two and in high concentrations. We actually put 8 or 9 different herbs in this particular product. And they blend and they have a synergy, and so they enable one another to work effectively. So for example, on the physical level, it's going to support the function of the prostate, for example. And I make reference particularly to this ingredient, saw palmetto, because this particular product is very effective, and this ingredient in it is effective in the enlargement of the prostate. So it's not a drug-related ingredient, it's actually a herb. And what's important is, in fact, very often people do take medication for this enlarged prostate. As I say, it's a very common condition. And what men are obviously concerned about is potency and impotence, or what we call erectile dysfunction. And very often, it's some of the medications that are being given to us that in fact cause these potency problems. And very often some of the common medications that are given for this prostate condition, the enlarged prostate, which remember is common but it's not cancerous, actually have this side effect. So one should speak to one's doctor if that is the issue. But also in this particular product, saw palmetto is quite well known, and as I say, is not a medication. It doesn't have those side effects, and is well worth trying in terms of enlarged prostate that is very common amongst men. So it also assists in basic male vitality, male potency, in other words, the normal functioning of a good, healthy male body. And what it does importantly is, I've said, one of our outcomes here is to try and decrease inflammation, which has many negative effects, which snowballs in the wrong direction, and supports the circulatory system, which has very many positive effects, and then snowballs in the right direction. So it works on a physical level, but also on an emotional level. And yeah, everyone has challenges, and sometimes we're just agitated or perhaps just, lacking vitality. We need a bit of calmness. We need this sort of blend of ingredients uplifts our mental attitude, just helps us to handle anxiety and nervous stress and even bouts of irritability. And that's only being human. So this product actually works on different levels, and a very helpful, very useful, and very powerful addition to our normal nutrient intake, or perhaps gaps in our diet. So that is the distinction between herbal products making you feel, tweaking your wellness, as opposed to the nutritional component, which is structural and looking after our health. So just to sort of finish with that section of it, these are products that I believe we should be looking at. If these are some of the concerns that you have, helping to make your world a healthier and a happier place. And so these are very specific to the male system, and I'm sure most of you can relate in some way to some of the benefits that there are here. But I do want to continue and talk more generally in terms of our nutritional requirements and how it affects our health, and how if we allow those systems to deteriorate, if you like, because we're lacking in some of the nutrients, what it is we can use. So let's just go to something that affects everybody, and obviously I'm going to be focusing more on men specifically. So these are some of the trends that are happening in our lifestyle diseases, as we call them, and they're all interrelated, as we've discussed in previous presentations. Now I want to just talk more specifically about the interplay of these particular conditions, which are very, very common. And yeah, weight management, I'm not using the word obesity, which seems to be the sort of scientific terminology, because I think what's tending to happen, and there's a lot of talk now in the marketplace in general, is that we tend to judge people based on their shape or size, and in fact, let's face it, you know, the men group, some are large men, they are just large by design, others are smaller by design. And so it's really more about managing your weight and watching the fact that you're not gaining weight. It's not about being a perfect size. That's not what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to achieve health for everybody. And so, you know, I think some people are threatened by the fact that we're supposed to be this size and that size, and that's not what we're trying to say here. We're saying, if you're picking up weight more than your typical size, that's where we need to show a bit of concern. So weight management or weight gain is certainly an issue, a place to start, because it influences, and is often the common denominator in many of these other conditions. Right, so for example, that's a typical example on the left. That's what the sort of the scientific community say, you know, your waistline, or the widest part of your waistline, shouldn't be more than about 102 centimeters, in which case then you are, you know, obviously carrying too much weight. But maybe you're someone who's large anyway, so that probably might be more your typical size. So I'm saying is if you're picking up weight on top of where you normally are, that's when we want to look at it. So it's really about where we're gaining the weight. Now, men typically gain weight around the middle. So as we could call it, you're an apple shape. That's just being polite, okay? Because some men are very large and a whole bag of apples probably in front of them. And that's when we have to watch what we're eating and concern ourselves with influences. And generally speaking, most of us we're uncomfortable perhaps with the fat that we might be carrying around. We don't like it, but we kind of figured it's pretty inert. It's, you know, it hangs around us. It's a bit of a parasite. It'll take in anything that we eat, and it, you know, we'll get rid of it one day. But in actual fact, science is starting to realize that specifically fat around the abdomen area, the tummy area, is actually quite active. Those are cells like any other cell. They're fat cells, and they will receive, and they're pretty accommodating. You know, they're just large in size and in number, and they will take whatever you'll give them. But they give back too, and they send out inflammatory messages, if you like. So inflammation here starts to come into play, and that's what becomes quite dangerous, in fact, because we only started to realize that, in fact, the immune system starts to kick in when we get fat that we deposit around the middle. And let me show you what I mean. So, you know, we have this little apple that starts to grow, or extra little tire that we have around the middle, and that men tend to deposit. They don't have, you know, men are not designed shape-wise to deposit fat around the hips and the buttocks and the thighs that women tend to do. So it gravitates towards the abdomen. And so if there's no space, you know, once you've created a little bit of fat, sort of a fatty, you know, just below the skin, it starts to have to deposit somewhere else. It goes into the abdominal cavity, and what ends up happening is it starts to deposit around the organs. So that's what we call visceral fat, as opposed to subcutaneous, which is just below the surface. So that is when it starts to become less desirable for our health. And that is when the immune system starts to kick in. In fact, the immune system almost treats this fat as if it were an invader. And so the immune system kicks in, fat cells are giving off inflammatory messages, and so we start to increase more inflammation. And so we are now in a state of constant inflammation, if you like. So if we're carrying excess fat and we're carrying enough of it, it's going to get around the organs, and that's undesirable. And so we really need to concern ourselves with the fact that we need to somehow move it along. And this is something that we haven't understood before, and this is what's driving the inflammatory situation that we have in our bodies, which in turn is driving other diseases as well. So this is why we're concerned about watching what you gain and how much you gain. And obviously, most men are gaining it right in the state. Yeah, so it's associated with many different diseases, and these are mostly diseases of lifestyle. In other words, they're not contagious. It's something we do have some degree of influence in. As I showed you initially, the food industry is not really on our side, so sometimes we purchase things and eat them and not really realizing that they are having a negative effect on us. And the fact that we're perhaps not moving around as much as we should, we're starting to gain this weight, and it's influencing these disease patterns. So I just want to briefly touch on, I talked about cardiovascular disease because that's our circulatory component, and then I want to talk just a little bit about diabetes and show you how this can influence conditions and how then we end up taking medication for these things. And medications have side effects too. And in fact, 80% of men with erectile dysfunction or impotency problems are actually overweight. And very often, it's the medications that we are taking also for some of these conditions, because of our carrying of a little bit of extra weight. It's also one of the side effects of the medication, is the fact that impotency or erectile dysfunction is on the increase because people are living longer, they're being medicated for just about everything, and it's not necessarily benefiting health of the men. So in terms of our cardiovascular disease, basically chronic inflammation, which we now know is activated, is stimulated, is maintained, if you like, by picking up a bit of weight and carrying it around the middle, contributes to the narrowing of our arteries. So what does the narrowing of the arteries do? It hinders blood flow. What do men want more specifically? To have a well-functioning body in every respect, good blood flow. So we want good quality arteries and veins for that matter. And if we have inflammation, there's a much higher incidence of this narrowing of the arteries. Now, just a little point there. Most of us think that is actually, that little plaque there is all full of cholesterol. Well, it has got cholesterol in it, but actually when they scratch away and they actually get down to the lining, right at the outer side, in other words, the lining of that artery, there are immune cells in there. So they actually get there first because they are, as I say, stimulated to respond. And there's some little nick or damage that's perhaps happened on that little, on the artery wall. And so the immune systems go there, they start, as an army, they start to fight and try and sort things out. And a bit like if you had a gutter and you had water going down there and then there was a drain. And if there was a twig or a little branch sticking out, I'm sure you can picture that obviously any leaves or anything coming down, any debris is going to get hooked onto that little branch. And then more is going to come along. And before you know it, you've got quite a big blob of debris and more attaches itself. And that's exactly what happens here. You might get a little nick or a little damage in that blood vessel wall. And then other substances that are floating past, they get attached to it, and then more gets attached to it, and cholesterol gets attached to it. And so we end up with this plaque that has all sorts of components in it, but what it's doing is it's narrowing that artery. And that's exactly what we don't want. We're going to talk a little bit about why you get that little nick in the artery wall in the first place. So basically, it's bad for your heart health, it's bad for your love life. So we need to start looking after our vascular system in general, the heart as well as all the blood vessels that are associated with it. That's the lifeblood of the whole body. But inflammation, as I talked about, I was talking a little bit about diabetes or sugar levels. Inflammation drives insulin resistance. So can you start to see this common denominator of inflammation, and some of the things that we are doing and eating are actually causing this inflammation, which is driving some of these conditions. So just very briefly, just to show you what I meant about talking about cells, I'm just going to show you how in fact the cell works and how it needs to be sensitive and how it can actually work in your favor or against you, depending on the quality of our general health. So the opposite of insulin resistance is insulin sensitivity. Insulin is a hormone and we produce it in response to the carbohydrates that we've eaten and the blood sugar that we have. Its job is to act as the key actually, to go to the cell and open the cell, the lock on the cell, and allow the glucose in and get it out of the bloodstream and then normalize your blood sugar. So we will eat something that we produce glucose. Glucose is not a bad thing. Glucose is our blood glucose, it's our blood sugar. We have to have it. And the first place that your blood glucose is going to go when you've eaten it is to the brain. You know yourself, when you're hungry or you're tired and you have something to eat, you perk up straight away because glucose, first of all, is favored to go to the brain, and then it is put into different cells as needed. So glucose arrived, you see that the green dot and the orange dot made contact. That's insulin, the key, taking hold of its cargo, and it's taking it to the lock. And hopefully it fits properly and drops off its cargo into the cell. And that's what a proper functioning bit of activity is supposed to happen in terms of our blood sugar. It's only going to happen if our insulin or those orange dots are in good condition, the key is well made, it's not being pressured to make, your pancreas is having to make too many keys because you're eating so much glucose. We can manage this balance by what we eat, how much of it we eat, and how quickly we eat it. And provided that that cell membrane is in good condition, that the lock is not skew or rusted or whatever, it's well oiled, it's supple, it's receptive, we have a good working system here. We have insulin sensitivity. But when we have inflammation, it tends to adversely affect that behavior. So we put together a product that helps to improve that biochemistry, manage the glucose uptake, improve the sensitivity of the insulin and the glucose and the cell, so in other words, the lock and key relationship, maximize that behavior. And this product, Botanical Balance, is called this because the balance is to balance blood glucose, and the botanical are the plants that we actually use. And this is quite an amazing little product. We just to show you again, manage glucose uptake, optimize insulin sensitivity, maximize the receptor function, in other words, the lock. We eat the glucose, quite normal. It's supposed to turn in. We eat food, it becomes glucose. That's quite normal. When it arrives in the bloodstream, quite normal that the insulin or the key would pick it up, and as I say, take it there and deliver its cargo. That is what we have achieved in improving this process by using the product called Botanical Balance. So inflammation upsets this behavior. So we don't want to encourage inflammation, but we want to improve this behavior, because otherwise what happens? Your blood glucose levels increase, and that's undesirable. And what happens when that blood glucose can't get into that cell for various reasons? As I say, the lock and the key process isn't working, the cell membrane isn't in good condition. Insulin is a hormone, and it's responsible for making things happen. So what it will do is it will take some of that glucose and it will put it in your fat cells, because where else is it going to put it? So that makes us more fat receptive, and that also increases obviously our fat content, and that worsens the situation. What glucose will also do, I mean, it's in the bloodstream, and the bloodstream is everywhere. That glucose left to its own devices will start to attach itself to different proteins, different fats, and some of those proteins will be on the wall of your arteries. And so what it does, it starts to damage the arteries. And so when I talked about that little nick in the artery wall, which then attracts other debris and substances to attract, to them, and eventually blocks the artery, it could start with this process. It could start with the fact that we don't have a good balance with our insulin and our glucose and our cell membrane, driven predominantly by inflammation. And of course, there are other factors in what we eat and how much we demand of our body's insulin, but just a little combo of inflammation that's driving this condition and affecting our circulation. And we can unravel this. It's important. This might sound complicated, but if you actually just take note and even just use the products initially to get your body back into the rhythm that it should be, this has very far-reaching effects, because it starts to neutralize inflammation, improves blood circulation, and it could go the other way very quickly as well. So what did we put in the product? We went to basic foods. Very simple combination, but hugely powerful. And so cinnamon, curcumin, and turmeric, these are foods and substances that we eat probably not enough of, or maybe we just sprinkle some cinnamon over the donut we're eating, and therein is the problem. And then we've got other nutrients like chromium. It's an essential mineral that we need. We can only get it from our food, so we've put it in there to make sure it's present. All of these are involved in improving that relationship, the biochemistry of receiving the glucose, making sure that the insulin docks with it, making sure that they both dock into the cell and it gets deposited. And alpha lipoic acid is something that the human body makes in every single cell, and it also plays a part in using up that blood sugar and turning it into energy. And even though we manufacture it in the body, as we get older, we're less efficient at manufacturing and synthesizing things. So we've put it in the product. And this product has been very, very effective, and we've had the most amazing results. Not just only on the insulin level, but improving cholesterol levels, improving memory. Makes sense. If your blood sugar is up and down all the time, you're going to be tired. You're not going to be able to focus. This product is starting to stabilize people's biochemistry. Excellent. Right, so this might be a familiar but unpleasant reaction. And this is actually, I'm talking about gout because it's quite a common occurrence. And it's also driven, interestingly, one of the reasons it's thought that we aren't able to excrete uric acid that causes the gout. very effectively is because of insulin resistance, because of the fact that our sugar levels are out of balance and we've got too much insulin in the system. It's not the only reason, but it's in the theme that I'm talking about, it is one of the contributing factors. For those of you who've had it, it's painful. It flares, randomly. See, it's a form of arthritis. But in fact, it's not one of those arthritis where we think about, bone on bone or the cartilage that's wearing. It's actually an inflammatory form of arthritis. And what is actually building up in those joints, you can see there on the left-hand side, is uric acid, but they become crystal-like. And so they become very, very short, very, very sore, and it's like sort of pins and needle-like. And so not pleasant at all. Now, it's aggravated by insulin resistance, which is aggravated in turn by inflammation, which in turn is aggravated by perhaps carrying a little bit too much weight. And so there are different foods, yes, that can aggravate this. And some foods that we eat actually, in their processing, produce uric acid. And under normal circumstances, we can excrete it. But it tends to build up if we have a lot of those foods or if we have a lot of inflammation or insulin resistance in the body. So foods trigger it, certainly proteins, some red meats. Everybody, I think, knows their trigger. They've simply got to know, where the cutoff line is. But also alcohol is often accused of this, and sometimes, I think beer does. People know that beer tends to aggravate it. But not all alcohol does that, and of course you have a threshold or a level that you can tolerate, and that only you will know that. What I just want to point out, though, is if you decided, well, all right, I'm not going to drink any beer anymore, I'm going to go for some fresh fruit juices. Just be aware that, yes, fruit juices would be preferable, but you think about how many fruits you have to have in order to get a glass of fruit juice, probably 6 or 7 fruits. You'd never typically sit and eat that many fruits at one sitting. And so the fruit sugar that's in there, the fructose, is simply just too high. And that can also be an aggravating factor. So while the fruit is good for you, remember fruit has fiber and it slows down the release of those sugars and it manages things more effectively for you. When you juice it, you break down the fiber. And so obviously the sugars are much more readily available. So if you're going to have some fresh fruit juice, there's a preference for, instead of alcohol, for example, not a bad idea, but make sure that you actually only have half a glass and you dilute it with some water so that you're not getting such an influx of fructose. And so, even for people who are suffering from gout from a food point of view, fruit and vegetables are important, but perhaps not more than 2 portions of fruit a day. And of course, the irony of all of this is when I told you all the driving or contributing factors to perhaps getting gout, perhaps you want to go and play a round of golf and you think, well, some exercise would do you good, but maybe you can't because you've got gout. So what happens is you have to take a cart, and so you never actually you just get there to swing a few clubs, but you actually don't get to do enough exercise. And so, it's unfortunate that you can't always be active in order to be able to reduce all the drivers of this condition. But we've got to slowly unpack this whole problem. We've got to slowly start to lose weight, slowly remove the inflammation, and slowly get the body back into a normal balance. Some of the foods, again, as I've shown you, are influencing it negatively, but there are thoughts that certain foods will help to lower uric acid levels. We definitely need to have enough fluid or water in our system, but vitamin C is definitely come up as a recommendation, but there is a proviso that it's about 500 milligrams or more. So at NeoLife, we happen to have a 500 milligram vitamin C product, and it's a sustained release, so it releases it over a period of time. And also, of course, what we do typically is we go to Whole Foods and we ensure that we actually put ingredients that come from the food that make the nutrient and the supplement act more like the food. So Neoplex concentrate means that we actually go to some of the citrus fruits and we actually take everything out of that fruit, the pith, the peel, the flesh, everything except the water. We dry it and we put it back into the product along with the vitamin C, so that we don't understand fully. I mean, science can't understand everything that nature has to provide. We try to understand it, but instead of trying to say, well, because we don't understand it, we'll leave something out, we make sure that we try to put everything that's back, that what the food would have supplied, into that supplement or tablet, and enable the body to make use of it and let the synergy do its thing. So vitamin C, a valuable tool if you do have this concern and you want to try something. Increasing the fiber intake also seems to be a recommendation. There are other recommendations, but just the ones that I think would be important, because as I pointed out to you, fiber is in the fruit itself, so it has value, but we're tending to eat more refined foods. I showed you that wheat, there's virtually no fiber in some of those things because it's been polished and shaved off it. So fiber, very important actually. And the reason why it would play a part here is because it regulates blood sugar, it mops on cholesterol, it keeps us satisfied for longer, so it helps to regulate our weight, and it of course keeps our digestive system working efficiently. So it's a winner all round, and it's definitely helpful, it seems, in helping uric acid levels. So we've got different products. You can take it in a powder form where you can, it's a food and drink mix, so you can actually have it on its own, just mixed with water. You can add it to your shake if that's what you have, or you can add it to the milk that you're going to put over a cereal or a porridge. Very, very versatile. You can even add it into baking. Take perhaps even up to a cup of the flour away and add the multifiber, this multifiber powder that we have. You can play around, and you can actually start increasing your fiber intake without actually even noticing it. And 8 grams of fiber is very significant when you compare it with what you're supposed to be having, which is, let's say, on average 30 grams a day. 8 grams is a pretty significant portion. If you prefer to take it in a tablet, well, it's available in a tablet. And what we've done is we've gone to Whole Foods and taken the fiber from a whole variety of different foods. So this is not just bran. This is actually from all different sources and different parts of the plants to actually give you a variety of things. So an excellent and very easy way to add fiber into your diet, and has, as I say, a huge impact on all the systems we've been talking about this evening. Okay, so just to sort of finish off, let's just show you that, in fact, foods make a big difference. And I guess, looking at that guy sitting there, it's, I suppose one of us was a bit of a no-brainer that obviously that little apple and tomato is not going to taste as good probably as those chips and the burger and fizzy drink. But if you start to look and see what the burger and the fizzy drink and the chips are going to do to you, and maybe it's worth just going to the other side of the scale every now and then. And now, we didn't put out this graphic about foods that fight inflammation. This is actually from Harvard University. And they're saying chronic inflammation has been linked to cancer, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, depression, and Alzheimer's. Fight inflammation with a healthy diet. And so there are foods that induce the inflammatory response. And you can see there, all those foods there are processed. And that's really the challenge here. We've got to start trying to take foods more in their natural state. So if you look at that picture there with the burger, for example, there's a little bit of color, a little bit of, maybe a bit of tomato, an excuse for a piece of lettuce, but there's not a lot of color on that meal. And I mean, I showed you how colorful fruit and vegetables can be. And if you look at the anti-inflammation foods, I mean, tomatoes, I talked about those as cancer benefits. Strawberries, all the berries, some of the citrus extracts, green leafy ones are the cruciferous, the fatty fish which you get from omega-3 fatty acids. These are the nutrients that actually NeoLife have recognized. And so what we've done is we've put those nutrients into a different delivery form. We've gone to whole grains and got the oils that are processed out, as I've talked about. We went to the fish and got those omega-3 fatty acids, fatty fish that we should be eating twice a week. We've put it in a capsule for you. We've gone to the fruit and vegetables. There's some tomatoes, there's some of the strawberries. And we've actually taken those extracts, the protective ones, and put them into a capsule. And we put a vitamin and mineral blend in there as well, just to make sure everything's available. And we've put this too into a very convenient little mini sachet that, again, just like the other one of fruit and vegetables, you can pop into your briefcase, into your pocket or your gym bag, and it's available, for you to take on a daily basis. So NeoLife really have recognized the need, and we have gone to those actual foods and encapsulated them or put them in a tab, delivered them in a different form to help you bridge this gap, to get you to changing your plate of food, and so that you don't have to fall prey to all to the processed foods that, as I say, sometimes we don't even realize what it is we've been given to eat. But we need, the more we have control about the foods that we eat, the better. So the less we eat foods that are made outside the home and we don't really know who made them and what they put in it, the better. Right, so I guess to finish off, tips to look your best every day. These are things you've all heard before, and we've heard them so many times we don't take notice of them anymore, but I hope I've shown you that they all matter and that we can make a difference. It's up to you to get enough sleep. If you're smoking, that's probably one of your biggest enemies. Definitely go to reduce inflammation and reduce circulation. That's a choice that one has to make. Drinking water, it's a recommendation we all have. Eating a balanced diet is something we're going to try and help you do. And as you transition to a healthier eating pattern, the NeoLife products are there to bridge those gaps so that you don't lose time. You actually benefit in a huge way. And physical activity doesn't mean that you have to go, you have to go and do some exercise, go to the gym, run a marathon. No. We just suggest you get off the couch and perhaps just move a little. And slowly you'll start to find that it will reduce inflammation, circulation will improve, you will start to feel better. And that spiral, that negative spiral that happens so quickly that we go in the wrong direction, starts to become a positive one and picks up momentum in the right direction. And I think just to end off, a challenge to all the men who are distributors in NeoLife, it's time, I think, to put some groups together, get your friends, people that you have some influence with in terms of the men in your community, and start to talk about these things. I think a lot of the trouble is that a lot of men think that weight loss and weight groups and all these type of things are for women only, and probably they are dominated by women. So I can appreciate that a man doesn't want to walk in there and talk about, how he's going to lose weight or his challenges. He needs to talk to other men about it. And I think that we've got a responsibility, and we have a lot of fantastic guys in our business who have a lot of knowledge and who are successful in using the products and, are actually products of the product. So my challenge to you is to go out and, let's chat to a whole lot of guys and help them to look their best every day. Yeah, so to finish off, there's a group of products that I've added to the others we talked about earlier, helping you to prevent the preventable. And let's show people how we can use the shake, replace a meal, lose some weight without even realizing, without even trying hard. I added lipotropic there in the top end corner. I didn't talk about it, but a lot of you have used it. You know very well that it's very good for regulating cholesterol, regulating blood pressure, looking after the quality of your blood vessels, so it improves your circulation, which in turn improves your health. And yeah, you'll have a fantastic time as healthy men, and I hope you've enjoyed that and learned something. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liz. That was absolutely amazing. There's so much information there, Liz, and you just put it so clearly. Thank you. We so value that session. I know some people had questions. We don't have the time to get into them, but I think most of them were answered as Liz went along. If they still aren't answered, please get onto the person who got you onto this call or your upline leader, and they will be able to get your questions answered for you. But I just look at products that we don't often talk about, like the wheat germ, products like the amitone, products like the Botanical Balance. As a male, with that information that you just shared with me, how can we not be taking those products? I just think it is so important. And so specifically for our distributors and the guests on the call, there's a lot of information in there, a lot of good information. But like Liz says, just make sure you're doing all the basics, like getting enough sleep, you're drinking your water, you're getting your activity and your exercise, you are eating more good things and less bad things. But is there a real need to supplement? And I just think it is crystal clear from what we've learned tonight. Supplementation is absolutely necessary. And so we need to look at what Liz, as men, look at what Liz shared with us and pick the area that we want to focus on to get right in our lives and then get consistent with it. And I've been part of NeoLife my whole life. And one thing that I've learned is consistency is your best friend when it comes to nutrition. Consistently eating right, consistently getting activity, consistently plugging your dietary gaps with good whole food nutrition. Consistency is your best friend. And we all know that when we live with health, with energy, with vitality, every single aspect of our lives is better. From our relationships to our professional life to if you're retired, I can promise you retirement will be better if you have energy and every other aspect of your life. So guys, I just want to thank you for joining us tonight. Liz, I just want to thank you once again. To our guests on the call, please get onto the person who got you onto this call and get hold of your products, get onto this nutrition. When is a good time to take good supplements? Yesterday. And if you didn't start yesterday, today is the better day to start. We want to thank you for being on this call. To our distributors, we have a big job to do. Our mission is to make this world a healthier and a happier place. It's going to happen through people like you and I by going out and sharing this information with others. So God bless you all. Have a fantastic week. And we'll see you on Wednesday night for our youth entrepreneurship presentation. Good night.